Wasting time. Wasting time.
All right, so I'm here for another episode of Zeitgeist. It's the second one, and this time we're going to be talking about this new sort of thing that's come up, right? And it's something that I feel like is kind of important or is kind of a big deal, and I don't really see it getting discussed all that much within my ecosystem, within the esports ecosystem, and even within the gaming sphere either. So I've brought in a couple of the experts, a couple of guys that are actually working on this, and I've got Ben to my left, who's also known as Hyprn. He's the CPO and lead network at OneQode. Matthew, aka Contra, who is the CEO at OneQode. So these two guys are, part of a team that are trying to essentially, from what I've heard, based on, the podcast that you guys have been on so far, you're trying to basically fix Australian internet and in turn also bridge the gap between Asia and ANZ and maybe even North America as well. And I have to admit, when I saw some of the news that was coming out, I obviously have seen one of the CSGO to Asia articles talking about one of the tournaments that is supposedly going to be hosted on these Guam servers that you guys are trying to introduce. I was a bit skeptical, right? So I think it's obviously good to go to the source and get a bit of an understanding of exactly what's going on here. So maybe I'll just let you guys start things off and give us a bit of a TLDR as to who you are and what you're kind of doing. Give me a bit of an understanding maybe of what OneQode is, and after that, we can jump into the discussion about the Guam server, because I think that's going to be the meat and potatoes of this show. So maybe let's go with you first, Matt. Obviously, as the CEO, I think you probably got a lot to say. Let me know, what is OneQode and what are you guys trying to do?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jordan, for that. And so OneQode, effectively, we're a new telco company. We're only about a year old, and our goal is to bring Australia back into the top 10 for internet speeds. That's kind of like our overarching mission. If you look at speedtest.net at the moment, they've got like a global speed test rankings. And for fixed internet speeds, I think Australia is about 62 at the moment. And there's countries like, from memory, I think Kazakhstan's above us. A lot of Eastern Europe's above us. There's all sorts of countries that, I think a couple of African countries rank in above us as well. So there's a lot of people doing internet better at the moment. And obviously we just spent a lot of money as a nation on our internet infrastructure, and yes, it's improved, but I don't think it's really being built for the next 10 to 20 years, which is what we want to do. So we believe that every Australian deserves lightning fast connectivity, and that's going to be really critical for our country as we move into the next couple of decades. Digital, everything's digital now, and that's a big issue for everyone. And that's our big focus. So we're effectively building a new telco from the ground up. And to simplify things as much as I can, just to talk a little bit about how we're doing it. If you picture the internet ecosystem as roads, as a road network, kind of like what we have here in Australia. You'll get, your house is on a small road, you'll take your car out, you'll drive on a small road, then you'll get on a slightly larger road. Then you might jump on a highway, and that highway will take you, to Sydney, or it'll take you to another suburb. And then, eventually, if you want to go overseas, you jump on a plane and you go overseas. Internet traffic's kind of similar. If you're sitting there in your home, there's all these different touch points that your internet goes through to eventually get where it needs to go, and each of those can be a bottleneck. And what we're seeing with the current system is that there's bottlenecks in all sorts of different locations. Now, that bottleneck in some areas could be as close as your curb, the pit in your curb. It could be as far away as the data center where the data is going to. Maybe your provider doesn't have enough bandwidth to get there. Or maybe when they're sending it overseas, it's going quite a convoluted route under the sea, and isn't getting where it needs to be anywhere near as quick. So we've got the advantage of being new, and we've got the advantage of being able to build from the ground up and build our network so it's got capacity at every single step.
Okay, and I got a bit of an understanding as well from some of our interactions that both of you, and this is obviously directed at you as well, Ben, were or still are people that are involved in gaming. I know, Ben, I've seen you on Twitter here and there a little bit, sort of posting within the esports sphere. So I guess I'll direct this at you. What's your sort of interaction with esports and gaming in general at the moment, or in the past? Are you kind of one of these guys that's come from what we would like to say a non-endemic side of things, in that you've come from the outside, or are you very much still within that gaming space? And that's kind of, it seems to me, what the focus almost is of this whole company or business.
Yeah. So my most recent esports touch point was I was the GM of Surge Esports, the contenders team
Right.
for Overwatch there. So I was running that team. Ever since then, most of my work right now, I'm just a silent consultant for esports teams and Twitch streamers, but heavily esports teams on building custom routers for their streaming houses and gaming houses. So I have custom routers I install in their houses that can bond 4 NBN connections seamlessly, so they get faster. And if one connection drops, they don't notice. It ensures their internet's always online.
Yeah.
So I'm still pretty heavily involved. I still watch esports. Like Matt and I both have Twitch open almost 24/7 with esports events running when we're working. So we're still watching heavily. I still, in the background, I talk to a lot of esports guys day in, day out. I help with server queries. People constantly ask me about their internet. As everyone knows, I'm pretty sure it's common on Twitter. No, my DMs are open. Like multiple people in a day will jump in. I actually had to essentially tell people I was on a semi blackout because my DMs were just rolling.
I did see
when we announced.
And I broke the blackout, by the way.
I am still around and watching, but I'm not responding to DMs unless they're critical right now because I just can't fix everyone's internet at the same time.
Yeah, especially when you're trying to sort of get what you are off the ground, essentially. And the last thing I wanted to touch on here, Matt, was that I think you said somewhere that you were a pro player in Counter-Strike at one point. How long ago was that, or what was the level at which you played?
Oh man, no, that was like about 16 or 17 years ago. And we played on the I'm showing my age now. There was the Game Arena ladder going on at the time. I think Internode were running a service at the time as well. We had two teams at one stage. We had two teams in the top 10. I don't think we were there for that long with two teams, but yeah, and when we travel around to some of the local tournaments, but the scene was so different back then. And I wasn't even on our best team. Like by that stage, I was more just managing the org. Yeah, I've kept up with the scene since then. I watch a lot more than I play now. But watching some of these Aussie guys, man, even just quite recently how Renegades have been dominating the Aussie scene. Watching those guys play has just been epic, and the level of play is just so much higher. I think because there's so much visibility. Like you can watch everything on Twitch.
I mean, if you've been watching a lot of the esports broadcasts that I've been involved in, you would probably see us bemoaning the lack of ability for players to play internationally at the moment. We're stuck in Australia where there's 4 teams that basically play the same thing over and over again. And then we watch the Asia region and there's 4 teams that are playing over and over and over again. So this is now where this whole Guam server thing starts to become a discussion. Now, before I jump into that, I do want to just give a quick shout out to the podcast that you linked to me. I think that gives a bit more of a background look at what OneQode is. So for any of the people that are watching this that are a bit more interested in what OneQode is doing, maybe you're an Aussie that sounds or is interested in, what you guys were talking about just before. I'll put a link in the description to that podcast. It's called the FOMO Show. I think it's actually Matt's show where they do talk about a bunch of stuff. But anyway, that one episode in particular is all about what OneCode's doing to try and fix Australian internet. But the topic that we're here to talk about today is a little bit more on the esports and gaming side of things. And I'll throw this one at you, Ben, because I've seen some of your posts on Twitter about this topic. Even, I feel like going back a couple of years. I'm not sure whether or not that's just me making that up or I'm thinking about someone else, but I feel like you've been trying to get this off the ground for a little while. So do you want to give me the TLDR about what this whole Guam server thing actually is?
Yeah, for sure. I can. So I actually tripped over this. I had a hunch back in 2016. I was actually doing a build for an ISP. I was looking at this map and I was like, there's latency numbers. Like, I reckon I could plop servers. If only there was a spot in the middle of the ocean. I was like, oh, hang on, there is a spot in the middle of the ocean. It's called Guam. Does it have cables? And I saw it had, at the time, it had 6 cables landing there. And I was like, that's actually enough to do what I want to do. I set up a bunch of random services to test the latency over those cables through multiple ISPs to see if someone had at least tried to do what I'd done at least once. I only needed one location to prove my point. And then I forgot about it. I got a job. I moved over to the Philippines. I was working. And then one night at midnight, I got an email from my server because I'd set it to in 2 years' time, send me the results. And it emailed me and said, hey, here's the results. And I was scrolling through the numbers going, bad, bad, bad. Wow, I stopped. And it had Google Taiwan to the University of Guam was 15 milliseconds. And I was like, and it had held that for 2 months. And I was like, oh, okay. I just struck gold. There we go. That's what I wanted to see. So then I went through I spent the next 2 years researching, connecting, networking. The biggest thing in telecommunications isn't about whether or not you can build a network. It's about whether you convince other people to work with you. That's absolutely the hardest part in our industry. So I had to make friends in Guam. I had to make friends in very large carrier companies who don't deal with single man shops and essentially sell them on my vision. And all in the middle of this, Australia esports was exploding around me, and I was watching constantly issues where Australian teams had to play against Chinese teams or Singaporean teams or South Korean teams, and everyone was complaining about the latency because all these countries were getting heaped into one big region, but the telecommunication infrastructure wasn't keeping up with that region and essentially running on what we call a hub and spoke model. So it had multiple hubs, so Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Singapore and Sydney. And then everyone else outside of those hubs got either taken to one of those hubs and then forwarded. So if you think of it as a highway with no exits, you were getting railroaded. If for Sydney viewers, it's like having been sent to the city from Campbelltown via Penrith, and you have no option. You must go via Penrith, which is just, it's insane. You're like, why can't we just go in a straight line? So that's what Guam is. No one else has routers there right now. No one else has ever had routers there apart from local telcos, and they don't buy capacity out the way we want to. So we're having to build this from the ground up ourselves. We have to buy the individual links one by one and then link them all into our system.
So you talk about the vision. I want to give you my perspective of what this looks like as maybe a layman or just an excited esports person. And then you can tell me whether I'm correct or whether I'm incorrect, right? So in an ideal world, what I see happening here is, like, as you guys would know if you've been watching Counter-Strike lately, we have the Oceanic top 4 teams, we have the Asian top 4 teams, and they compete separately, right? And they'll often meet each other on LAN when they are able to go to Asian minors or what have you. Obviously, right now during COVID, that's not a factor. So we're very isolated here in Australia, and even Asia is very isolated as well. They can't compete against European teams, can't compete against North American teams quite so much. So their only real option is to compete domestically within Asia. And even that then causes some problems, as we've seen, even when teams from the Middle East start to get involved, it's just routing nightmares all over the place. But what I would envision, and if I'm correct, I think this would be pretty sick, is if you guys get these servers up in Guam and it actually, the ping, works as you say it does, which we'll get into as a discussion point as well. We might have teams like Renegades who are based in Melbourne, or teams who, like Avant, are based in Sydney, being able to then connect to this Guam server and play against teams, I want to say from China, although I do notice that wasn't actually a ping test on the website, so we'll talk about that in a second as well. Maybe let's say a team like PaperX from Singapore. So they'll be able to all connect to this Guam server, and everyone's able to play on a relatively even ping, maybe somewhere up to about 70 ping, something like that, which is workable depending on the game title. For Counter-Strike, it might just be pushing the upper echelons of what teams want to play on. But certainly for things like PUBG, for World of Tanks, or even for a couple of other games, I think that's a very real possibility. So is that the vision from your perspective? I mean, I guess I'm talking purely from a gameplay and esports kind of side of things. I know there's a whole sort of outside world, which is businesses and blah, 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 but no one's actually interested in that. Let's just talk about the game side of things. This is an esports podcast. So from an esports standpoint, is that the vision? Is it possible to actually merge Australia and Asia and maybe even some of those surrounding countries like the west coast of North America?
Yes, it is. The flat answer is yes, it is possible. All those numbers we've given you, I added a tax to them purposely. I padded them. So they're not the raw numbers. The raw numbers are, in some cases, are drastically different. But then we took into account local ISPs, local internet connections, and we also took into account really obscure things that network engineers figure out. That essentially we just weighted all the latencies to the countries based on what we believe the worst case would be for most countries. So the numbers will be different. Initially, they're going to be all over the shop because there are over 3,000 ISPs in the Asia Pacific region that we need to interconnect with. I have no hope of doing that the next year. I wish I could. I really do. But it's just a simple fact that I have to approach each one by one and then ask for a private fiber link. We have these things called IXs, internet exchanges, where we can meet a lot of them at once, but they may not always give us the best path. And we eventually want to work, especially with the larger ISPs across the larger economies. We want to work with them individually and have mutual benefits. We just don't want to just come in and just steal all their traffic. We want to work with them. So that's going to be a long process. Initially, it's going to be very playable. I can say that. to Australian players, it's just going back to 2005. Like we all lived on 50 milliseconds perfectly fine for years, and then we got spoiled when server latency went down, but we were fine. And the alternative is 200. So I believe even 70 milliseconds is a far cry better than the 220 that a lot of guys are getting slogged with right now, or worse.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you some context, right? I play World of Tanks, which has a server in Hong Kong at the moment, and I get about 150 ping to there, maybe 130 on a good day. So if you can get that down to 70, that's already half my ping, basically. I think there's very much the same thing happening in PUBG, where there aren't even really... I mean, there are oceanic servers, but there's barely anyone playing on them at the moment, and most of the players have to actually play on SEA outside of the peak times. And so even in the esports, there is no oceanic tournaments anymore, really, outside of qualifiers for the APAC region. Once you qualify, once you get to a certain level, you're playing in APAC. So my ideal world would be some of these tournaments, let's say like PUBG's PCS3 APAC. Now, I know we don't want to go into details necessarily, but if that is going to be the pathway for Australian teams in particular to go into international competition, surely it's better to have it on this server in Guam, where we might get 70 ping, the Asian teams might get 40 to 60 ping, as opposed to somewhere, let's say like Singapore or Hong Kong, where we can get up to 130, 150 ping. You know, there has been times in the past where teams have from Singapore played on the Perth server, and we've been able to, from the east coast of Australia, play on that Perth server as well. And then there's been an even ping, but it's been a little bit janky, and that can really only work for the teams in Singapore because they get that direct route, as opposed to someone from Hong Kong goes to Singapore.
And just to interject there, so you guys know, only 2 Singaporean of the 4 actually go to Perth. So if you're on the wrong ISP, you won't come to Perth. That is another major issue, is that not every ISP builds their networks the same. Most of them are drastically different, and most of them pick based on cost, not based on latency. I think we're the only carrier right now who's specifically sitting here like counting the figures on our links. Everyone else just goes the cheapest and goes. Yeah. So unless your low latency route is cheap, no one uses it. RE, the servers, I'm very open to help anyone, especially for CSGO. Just my DMs are open, our emails are open. We're happy to work with any TO. Especially in this initial phase, to show you what the world can be like. 100 milliseconds is the magic figure. Below 100, it should be playable, because 100 milliseconds is your hand-eye. You know, that's the point where you start really noticing the jitter. So anything below 100, as long as it's stable and it's not like fluctuating like crazy, you'll be fine. And to give you some context of the market, there's 4.98 billion people inside the 100 millisecond circle around Guam. We've done the numbers.
Yeah.
So it does cover. I can quickly touch on China, and the simple thing is that it's very, very hard. There's only 2 ISPs that cover the whole country. Now 3, sorry, no, there's 3 here. It's China Mobile, China Unicom, China Telecom. And the issue here is around regulation and government approvals to connect into those internet networks. I really can't say anything about our latency to China. I can say that we are working very hard behind the scenes to make it possible. I would love to see Chinese teams playing on this, because it would make the business case so much better from our point of view, because 1 billion people can now access our servers, right? It just opens up this massive floodgate of traffic onto the game servers. But China aside, there's still about 2.3 billion people who are hit in that 100 milliseconds. You know, you've got Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, and South Korea, just to name a few of the major economies there, all of which have, growing local esports teams, all of which who would benefit. Like even these intra-Asia, you would know, having, been involved with that, even the intra-Asia latency can be crazy. A team from South Korea can get a really bad routing path to Singapore and be hitting it for 95 milliseconds for some crazy reason. And then the team in the house next door is hitting it for 40.
Yeah, I can remember times in the past where we've had matches between Korean teams and Mongolian teams, and they can never decide on the server. They just go backwards and forwards. Like, if you've ever heard of a server veto, right? They'll veto out, like, they'll say, okay, we don't want to play on China. We don't want to play on Hong Kong. We don't want to play on Singapore. We don't want to play on Malaysia. We don't want to play on this server, that server. And then you get down and it's like some server out in like Africa, because neither team has wanted to give the other an advantage. So they're both on like 150 ping, and you're just like, what is the point of this anymore? Anyways, so hopefully we can fix that.
Well, that's the goal too, Jordan. Like, we really see Guam as a level playing field. Like it's like a neutral. It's almost like cricket at the moment. Like no one tours Pakistan. They all go to the UAE to play their games because it's a neutral venue. And I think that can be Guam. Like that's, suddenly it's not about, we want to have the server in our country. We want to have it in our country, and there's a fight over that. It's like, okay, Guam is the default. As long as we can both hit it with a reasonable ping, it makes things pretty even. and we can default to that, and we can just use Guam. And geographically, there's not many other areas in APAC that have that. They just don't have access to the infrastructure. But all these cables have aligned in Guam, and there's a couple of new cables that we're using that are coming in there. And it's for the first time, really, I think, letting us have a neutral location that can be kind of the default for APAC esports.
Yeah, that would be the hope. I want to just rattle off a couple of the ping numbers here because I've done that on some other shows. Obviously, if people are watching to this point of this show, they probably have a pretty high degree of interest in this topic. So I'm just going to go through and list off the ping numbers that you guys put on the announcement. So the ping to Japan was 30. You've got 40 ping roughly to Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Philippines. Roughly 60 to Singapore, Australia, Russia, and 110 to USA. So it's even interesting, like you could even theoretically get maybe some of these CIS teams involved. If you're getting 60 ping to Russia. Russia's a big place though, so I suppose that could really depend on where in Russia you're talking. But let's, for the sake of argument, say they're from Moscow or that side of the country as opposed to all the way up north where maybe people aren't even playing esports anyway. But there's definitely a lot of possibilities when it comes to something like this. And I also want to give the context for anyone watching that's maybe overseas. I actually pinged Guam, and it's interesting that you mentioned University of Guam because I tried a ping test to University of Guam as well, and my ping was 212. So I was thinking, you know what, 60 ping doesn't sound too bad in that context. But Matt, I do have a question for you in regards to how long of a stretch are we really looking here? I know this might be a bit of an open-ended answer because there's obviously a lot of factors, but let's talk about like my ideal world, what I talked about before, teams playing on this Guam server, that's like the new hub for APAC esports. Like how long-term is that actually going to be before it's a reality? Is it a 5-year? Is it a 10-year? Is it a 1-year? Where are we sort of sitting at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot depends on the take up. Like we're almost completed our deployment now, so we're getting ready to basically switch the network on. So that's pretty much done from our side. One of the reasons that we were so keen to run this tournament there as soon as we could was to kind of show the world what was possible, and say, hey, this thing is here, it actually works, and we're prepared to work with anyone and everyone to make this happen because I think like we're all gamers at heart. Like we've all got a bit of a history. Most of the people in the company with gaming, we all game ourselves. So it's kind of selfish, right? Like we want this to work as well.
Just to cut in, we actually have every Sunday night about 5 of us all play games together. We were playing last night, like all OneQode staff playing together
on the Guam server.
We all play weekly. Can't say.
hopefully one day. But yeah, let's touch on this tournament a little bit more in depth because that was kind of what, for me, initially actually brought me on to this topic. I had literally never heard of OneQode before. I knew of you, Ben. I'd seen you posting on Twitter and stuff, and I knew kind of what you were trying to do, but I never really thought it was like getting off the ground. I thought this guy's just some crazy crackpot that's like trying to connect Asia and ANZ. Like that's never going to happen. Like what a lunatic. Anyway, but it seems like a reality. At least you've convinced me, which is partly why I'm doing this, because I want to just try and get a little bit of exposure to it because I think it would be very, very cool, especially after the year that we have. Like, can't tell you how bored I've been watching the same tournaments all the time. I think it would be fantastic to have the Asian teams play the Aussie teams. So this tournament that OEL is in reality the tournament organizer for it, which is Oceanic Esports League, for those that don't know. I'll put a link to another article. There's going to be plenty of them in the description here for you guys to take a look at. But this one will give you the TLDR on what this tournament is. It's the CSGO to Asia article. But the broad strokes are it's a $10,000 tournament. There's supposed to be, or the attempt is to be, having teams from Asia and ANZ. And I even saw someone tweeting about teams from the North American region as well. It wasn't one of you two, though. It was someone from Liquipedia, actually. So it seems like there's a few people sort of getting involved with this. $10,000 tournament, trying to bring all these regions together to play on this server. And it's essentially, as I understand, and what you guys have said so far, is that it's a test run to see whether or not this is going to work, and maybe just to try and build some exposure and build some hype for what you're planning to do in the future. But can you give me a bit of a TLDR of maybe what the expectation is for this tournament, or what even is the groundwork? Like, have you already got teams signed up? Or I don't even know if you can say that yet if you've got teams, but if you do, who do you have and what do you expect to happen in this tournament? I assume you want to get every single one of those regions together just to see if you can make it work.
Yeah, we do. So I can't say who's who's signed up yet because signups haven't officially opened. There's actually due to be a press release dropping this week sometime. We actually just before this call we were talking to them, hashing out the last bit of details. It's been a very hectic time getting things online, and we got blindsided on Sunday night with one of the submarine cables got cut. So
that's a
I had to spend the morning getting a backup cable connected, which is all sorted. Like rest assured, 38 minutes it took me to find a new cable and get it connected. So we're all good there. So US is very much in the realm of possibility, especially in the next couple of years. So that one of our really strategic partners here, they're actually building a new cable to the US, and that's going to chop out about 30 milliseconds of latency. When that cable comes online, things will get a lot more interesting. We would love, I do know that the US will be open. You will be able, as a US team, although I'd recommend if you don't live in California or the West Coast,
It's not worth it.
I wouldn't hold my breath. It's going to be really touch and go. I'm talking 120, 130 milliseconds on the top end for East Coast USA. So it can be a bit touch and go. I hope to get that better in the future, but I can't solve everything with one bullet, unfortunately. So other than that, yeah, the idea is to try and get teams from every country. We would like to see this be like an Asia Cup almost, where we get at least a team from every country represented.
Interesting. Is there going to be an invite system? You've said qualifiers, so that's one thing, but would you...
Yep, there is an open qualifier. I can answer that question in about a minute. I'm just going to check on the invite thing to make sure that it's set in stone before I say anything.
Because I think for me, from my perspective, that would be the ideal world, is to invite someone like Renegades, invite someone like Tai Lu. Again, these are big names, obviously, and that's the draw card.
I can say that there is going to be an invite system. I don't know what the slot allocations are right now. So there definitely will be invites going out. I'm not sure on the slot allocations right now.
Awesome. All right. I wonder if teams are going to really jump on this, or if they're going to sort of brush it aside and be like, oh, that's just a $10,000 tournament. Because sometimes teams are a little bit like that, as you would understand, I'm sure. They're all a little bit sometimes like that. So I would say, I don't know how many of these teams will actually watch this, but I would say if you are watching this, I think, it's definitely worth something trying, especially considering there's not much else going on the calendar at the moment.
No, especially not for this Asia Pacific area. There's not much in your calendar. We would really love to see you all play. I'm going to make myself personally available to all the teams throughout the event. If you have any latency issues, just start shooting me information. We are going to have a full team online the whole duration, trying to tweak things as we go. Because for us, this is as much for us a proof of concept as it is to give something back to the community. So we would love to see teams from every country participating. We want to see that because it helps us gather data, and it helps us make things better in the future for more events going forward, for more games going forward as we scale up.
All right. Well, I think we're starting to get toward the end of the discussion. I've mostly filled out my topics. Obviously, you guys can feel free to throw something in if you want to touch on something that maybe I've missed. But I want to get a bit of an understanding of how people can sort of start to take advantage of this. Let's say maybe I'm a tournament organizer that wants to get a server in Guam, or I'm a team that wants to get a server, like a scrim server even, or something like that. Or even a dev that wants to get a server. Let's say I'm wargaming and I want to move my Hong Kong server to Guam. Is this a realistic possibility? How do we get in touch with you? What's the next steps for everyone on the ladder, whether it be TOs, teams, developers, players, and people like myself? And I just want to, get on this server and see how it goes. Can I do that at some point?
Definitely. So the easiest way is just to go to our website, onecode.com, and hit the big contact button, and say who you are and what you want. Otherwise, our Hyperion servers, hyperion-servers.com, that page will go live as soon as servers are ready to be bought. For individuals who want to try it, I will be tweeting out, and we will make sure we play as soon as we have the network online. We're going to throw some public servers up. We'll throw up some surf servers, a couple retake servers. We're trying to work with someone to run a pug bot too, so people can just try it. Because that's the biggest thing about this stuff, is just to get in there and just give it a try. We're not just going to put CSGO servers up. We're going to throw some Team Fortress servers online too for some nostalgic games across Asia Pacific. We'll have some Quake servers online for the Quake players out there. So if we can possibly host a server, if it's a game that has dedicated servers we can host, we'll throw one online just to prove it and just for people to try it. Otherwise, the absolute easiest way is just to hit our website, onecode.com, hit the big contact button and send us an email. Otherwise, tweet at me. I am in blackout, but I am still seeing my notifications. And if I see it's like a TO or a tournament or a publisher or someone, just hit me up there. and we can definitely work with you.
If you're wondering what his Twitter is, because normally I put it on the graphic, but in this instance, I thought I'm talking to a couple of professionals. I'll use their names instead of Twitters, instead of gamers. I'll put links in the description, but it's Hyperion without a Y or an O or basically anything except for a,
Yeah.
you know, whatever. You'll find it.
now.
Just type HPR something and it'll probably pop up or look, yeah.
It just
Otherwise,
yeah, I'll switch my Twitter name to Ben Cooper so people can
it'll
find
be
me.
in it'll be in the description anyway for people that can't find it. Look, guys, it's been great to have your time. We're pretty much at the end of the conversation though, so I'll open the floor to you, Matt. You've been a little bit quiet. If there's anything else you want to say here or final thoughts, shout outs, whatever you want to do, now's the time.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jordan. There's not much more I'd like to say. Like, I think, you know, just to echo what Ben said, we're doing this for the community. Like, we're all passionate gamers. We want to see APAC, the APAC region do great. I mean, mate, what you were saying about Renegades, there's nothing more that I want than to be able to open up Twitch next year and see Renegades testing themselves against some of the Asia teams and the other guys too. But also, you know, coming from back in the day, being one of the grinders, running a team which grounded out, like, I think there is so much potential here for your tier 2 and your tier 3 teams to actually get better practice partners, to start integrating themselves into the wider ecosystem. And I think we need it. Like, 2020 has been a mad year, and we've been in this hyper regionalization like situation for basically the whole year now, where you can only really play in your region. And we just want to open things back up. You know, we just want to let people play with the rest of the region. We want to strengthen the scene. So yeah, just echo what Ben said. Like, hit us up, let us know how we can help. We're super available, and this is something we're really passionate about. So. And also, like, we are going to make mistakes. Like Ben said, this is a new thing we're doing. If things aren't working the way they should be working, it's probably because we haven't seen that problem yet, and we'll get it fixed as soon as we can. So just stay communicative with us and let us know what you want, and we're here to help.
Awesome. Did you have any final thoughts you wanted to throw in there, Ben, or are you all good as well?
No, I think Matt covered it off, and I think I spoke for most of the call. So
yeah. Well, anyway, I sort of thought this was your baby. So initially, when I reached out to you, I thought this was going to be a one-man interview. Matt wanted to have his time in the sun. That's fine. We all appreciate it.
Matt wanted to come along.
Yeah.
So
That's right, mate. Like,
I let him tag along.
You don't know the half of it. Like, Ben, you know, you can say what you want to find in Guam, and Ben will open up Google Maps, and within 10 seconds, he'll have you right there on the island. With where that building is. Like, the guy knows Guam like the back of his hand.
I assume you've been to Guam, by the way, just as an aside.
Actually, no, I haven't.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe one day.
I tried to get there. I tried to get there 3 times. Twice my flights were cancelled, and the third time COVID hit just before I was due to fly over.
Love that. All right. Well, look, that's the end of the show. For anyone that wants more information, obviously you can hit these guys up. Check out the OneQode website. I'll have links everywhere in the description. And obviously make sure you support that tournament, the OEL tournament that's coming up, $10,000 on the line there. Again, check out the CSGO to Asia article if you want more information on that. And if you're a tournament organizer, this is my words to you. Get on this. Otherwise, you're literally killing APAC esports.
Wasting time.